She built one of the most powerful Christian broadcasting empires in the world, reaching over 2 billion homes across the globe. And when she took her last breath on May 7, 2026, her eldest son was just down the road. He was never called. He found out she was gone only after she had already passed, not from family, but from a network attorney. His wife wrote 3 words on social media that carried the weight of everything. "We forgive them." This is the full documented story of Joni Lamb, the co-founder and president of Daystar Television Network, her remarkable rise, her final years marked by family fracture and private decline, and the heartbreaking silence at the end of a life that touched hundreds of millions of people. Before we go any further, a brief note on sourcing. Everything in this video is drawn from named, verified sources. The Roy's Report, Religion News Service, the Dallas Morning News, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Christian Post, NPR, NBC News, Daystar's own official network statement, Wikipedia's confirmed death record, and peer-reviewed medical literature from the Cleveland Clinic and NYU Langone. Where allegations exist, they are presented as allegations. Where denials exist, they are reported as denials. This is a factual account of a story that is still unfolding, handled with accuracy, care, and context. Joni Lamb, co-founder of Daystar, longtime face of Christian television, and one of the most recognizable women in religious broadcasting, was 65 years old when she died. The network she helped build from nothing now reaches 64.7 million American households, surpassing even Trinity Broadcasting Network's reach of 47.3 million, according to Religion News Service. That number alone tells you the scale of what she was a part of. But numbers don't tell the whole story. And in Joni Lamb's case, the story behind those numbers is far more complicated and far more human than a headline can hold. She was born Joni Trammell in 1960 in Greenville, South Carolina, in a Pentecostal household where faith wasn't background noise. It was the foundation of everything. She grew up attending the Tremont Avenue Church of God, and it was there, during a revival meeting, that a young itinerant preacher named Marcus Lamb came through and changed the course of her life. Within 2 years they were married, in 1982, and almost immediately set out together as traveling evangelists, moving from church to church, living a life built entirely around their calling. There was very little room in that life for anything outside of ministry, and by all accounts, neither of them wanted there to be. In 1984, they settled in Montgomery, Alabama, where they acquired the state's first full-power Christian television station and began teaching the Bible on broadcast television. That was the seed. 6 years later, they sold that platform and relocated to Dallas, Texas, where they picked up another station and began thinking bigger. By 1993, the Daystar Television Network had been formally founded, headquartered in Bedford, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and officially launched on New Year's Eve 1997. What happened from there was nothing short of extraordinary by the standards of religious media. Daystar grew from a regional Christian station into a global broadcasting presence available on DirecTV, Dish Network, and across every major cable system in the United States. Its official materials describe reach into over 2.3 billion homes worldwide. In 2006, it became the first foreign Christian network to be granted a broadcast license by the Israeli government. This was not a small operation. It was one of the most consequential platforms in the history of American religious broadcasting. And Joni Lamb was not a peripheral figure in its construction. She was central to it. Her on-screen presence was a defining force in Daystar's identity. Her flagship program, Joni Table Talk, a weekday roundtable that tackled cultural, spiritual, and social issues with a panel format that felt genuinely conversational rather than scripted, won Best Television Talk Show at the National Religious Broadcasters Awards in 2004. Over the course of its run, the show accumulated 10 Telly Awards, 3 Lone Star Emmy Awards, 6 additional Lone Star Emmy nominations, and 5 Daytime Emmy nominations. It was eventually syndicated across networks including ABC, CBS, and Fox Business. The daily live broadcast, Ministry Now, which began its life as Celebration and evolved through various formats over the decades, was the heartbeat of Daystar's programming schedule, and Joni was the face it organized itself around. She was not simply a minister's wife who happened to appear on camera. She was, in the fullest professional sense, a broadcaster. Skilled, experienced, commanding, and genuinely beloved by the audience she had spent decades building a relationship with. That relationship was real. The grief her longtime viewers have expressed this week is real. Those two things are important to hold on to as the rest of this story unfolds, because nothing that came later erases what she built, and nothing that she built cancels out what came later. Both are true simultaneously, and any honest account of her life has to carry both. And then, Marcus Lamb died. On November 30th, 2021, the co-founder and CEO of Daystar passed away at the age of 64 from COVID-19 complications. The death was covered by NPR, NBC News, and the New York Times, partly because of the sheer size of the network he had built, and partly because Daystar had been among the most prominent platforms in the country, airing programming that promoted what doctors described as ineffective treatments for COVID-19 during the pandemic. Marcus and Joni had both publicly endorsed those approaches. Marcus did not survive his infection. Joni announced his passing in a live broadcast to the network's Facebook audience, a moment of raw public grief witnessed by millions of people who had watched them together for decades. She stepped immediately into the role of sole network president. The weight of that responsibility, institutional, personal, and spiritual, was enormous, and she carried it publicly without visible faltering. According to reporting later published by the Roy's report, following Marcus's death, Joni's annual compensation at Daystar increased by approximately 140%, rising to over $1 million. Less than 2 months after Marcus died, a Colorado psychologist named Doug Weiss, who had appeared as a guest on Daystar programming on previous occasions, filed for divorce from his wife of more than 30 years. That divorce was finalized in May 2022. On June 10, 2023, with the divorce barely over a year behind him, Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb were married. Joni described the relationship publicly in a Charisma News article as a miraculous divine provision, a gift from God in the aftermath of her grief. Weiss joined her as co-host of Ministry Now, sharing her daily platform before a global audience almost immediately. Whatever private joy the relationship brought her, its public arrival created an immediate and severe fracture within the Lamb family. Jonathan Lamb, Joni's eldest son, had served as a vice president at Daystar and, by multiple accounts, had a deeply close relationship with his father Marcus. He opposed the marriage to Doug Weiss on theological grounds, arguing that Weiss had not divorced his first wife on what Jonathan understood as biblical grounds, making the new union what he and his wife Susie characterized publicly as adulterous. That theological objection was serious enough on its own, but it became entangled with something far graver, something that would eventually dominate the entire subsequent chapter of this story. According to exhaustive investigative reporting by the Roy's report, drawing on interviews, documented records, and secretly recorded internal meetings, Jonathan and Susie Lamb alleged that in 2021, while Marcus was still alive, Jonathan had discovered a male family member in a room with his then 5-year-old daughter, under circumstances they characterized as sexually abusive. The family member, identified publicly only under the pseudonym Pete, denied all allegations and was never charged with any crime. Jonathan and Susie further alleged that both Marcus and Joni had, at the time, urged Susie not to go to police. Joni consistently, emphatically, and repeatedly denied any abuse cover-up. She characterized the allegations as fabrications and accused Jonathan of running what she described as a smear campaign, motivated by his ambition to succeed his father as network president. In May 2025, the Colleyville Police Department, which had opened a formal investigation into the matter, closed it without filing charges, citing insufficient evidence, while stating publicly that the case could be reopened if the child made a formal disclosure. Jonathan Lamb was fired from Daystar on November 16, 2024, following a termination letter the network attributed to the conclusion of a 15-month performance improvement process. Joni's own public statement confirmed she had fired her firstborn son, and reiterated her accusation that he had fabricated the allegations she denied. Against that backdrop, a woman named Denise Boggs had become a significant and widely discussed figure in the broader story surrounding Daystar. Described by those familiar with the network's inner circle as a trusted counselor and prophetic voice who had ministered to the Lamb family over many years, Boggs had written a letter to the family after becoming alarmed at what she observed in Joni following the relationship with Doug Weiss. That letter was made public through Jonathan Lamb, as documented across multiple reporting platforms. The letter described Boggs meeting with Joni and coming away deeply disturbed, describing Joni as seeming like a fundamentally changed person, noting that she had repeated something Weiss had said to her that Boggs considered degrading for a woman in ministry, and observing that Joni appeared flattered rather than troubled by it. Among the most widely quoted lines from that letter was a warning that Joni's well-being, her health, her integrity, the family legacy, and the millions of people who placed their trust in Daystar were all at risk. That sentence was written before Joni's health collapsed, before more than 30 broadcasting partners departed the network, and before the family's institutional unity unraveled publicly. Its prescient quality was not lost on the people following the story closely. Joni's response to Boggs's increasingly public involvement was to reportedly send a cease and desist letter, a ministry that Marcus had blessed Boggs to operate from a property connected to his legacy. Known publicly as Poppy's House, a place intended as a restoration and healing center for ministers, was shut down, and the property was sold. In a secretly recorded internal meeting, later circulated publicly, and referenced in reporting by the Roy's report, Joni dismissed Boggs's use of the property as minimal and stated that she had cut ties with her entirely. Jonathan pushed back in the same meeting, arguing that his father had specifically supported the ministry there and that Boggs had been a profound blessing to the family. That exchange became a microcosm of the entire broader conflict. A son defending his understanding of his father's intentions against a mother who had, in his view, changed course the moment a new man entered her life. In the months that followed Jonathan's firing in November 2024, the public record of Daystar's institutional damage grew significantly. More than 30 major broadcasting partners departed the network, a fact documented by both Religion News Service and the Roy's report. Among those who left were Joyce Meyer, Greg Laurie, Jack Hibbs, Jack Graham, Jesse Duplantis, Ray Comfort, and others. Names that represent a substantial portion of the most recognized voices in American evangelical Christianity. That exodus was not incidental. It reflected the depth of the concern among Daystar's ministry partners about what had happened to the network's leadership and direction. The documented regulatory history of Doug Weiss also became part of the public record during this period. The state of Colorado's licensing boards had taken documented action against him, including a 2010 final agency order finding that he had failed to meet professional standards during a marital counseling intensive, with the board's language describing his conduct as having made him, in effect, an executioner of the marriage he was supposed to be helping to restore. 7 former clients of Weiss's heart-to-heart counseling center in Colorado Springs told the Roy's report that their sessions with him had left them more traumatized than when they arrived. The Trinity Foundation documented that Weiss's nonprofit, Healing Time Ministries, had reported revenue of $50,000 or less to the IRS for a year in which a $400,000 grant had been separately documented. There were also allegations, which Joni denied, that a Daystar Ministry credit card had been used to fund a honeymoon at a luxury Mexican resort, with the Roy's report stating that documented charges supported those claims. In February 2025, Joni broadcast an imprecatory prayer on air, calling for God to cause pain, confusion, and anguish to those she described as trespassers against her territory, and to deliver double punishment to anyone interfering with the Lord's anointed. The Roy's report subsequently reported that the exact wording of that prayer had been traced to a businessman named Taylor Welch, who had prayed it in a financial context, meaning the prayer Joni broadcast to her global ministry audience had been borrowed from a prayer that had nothing to do with ministry at all. It was against that entire accumulating backdrop that Joni Lamb disappeared from the screen. Her husband, Doug Weiss, addressed viewers on Ministry Now and disclosed that Joni had suffered a back injury involving 2 hairline fractures in her spine at the T11 and L1 vertebrae. He asked for prayer and described the condition as one requiring rest and time. For many viewers, that medical explanation was, on its face, straightforward enough, and it is worth taking a moment to understand why. The thoracolumbar junction, the zone where the lower thoracic spine meets the upper lumbar spine, is, according to the Cleveland Clinic and peer-reviewed research published in the American Journal of Medicine, one of the most biomechanically vulnerable regions of the entire vertebral column, accounting for between 60 and 75% of all vertebral compression fractures. The reason is biomechanical. The stiffness of the thoracic spine meets the flexibility of the lumbar spine precisely at this junction, creating a zone of concentrated mechanical stress under the continuous demands of load-bearing. Hairline fractures at T11 and L1 are genuinely serious injuries. They cause significant pain. They restrict movement. They require rest, typically a rigid back brace, careful pain management, and eventually physical therapy. Most patients, in otherwise good health, recover within approximately 3 months under proper conservative care. The problem, as Daystar's own official statement made clear after Joni's death, was that she had not been in otherwise good health. The network's announcement of her passing disclosed what the initial on-air explanation had not communicated: that prior to the back injury, Joni had already been dealing with serious health challenges she had chosen to manage privately. The injury did not initiate her decline. It compounded a situation that had already been developing. Daystar's own words, quoted by Religion News Service from the official statement, read, "The back injury compounded these challenges and led to a more serious medical situation than anyone had anticipated. Despite the dedicated efforts of her medical team and the prayers of so many around the world, her condition worsened in the last days." What that underlying condition was, the network did not specify. In the weeks leading up to her death, viewers who had seen Joni's brief returns to the screen had noted visible changes in her appearance, including observations about facial swelling and what appeared to be motor difficulty on her left side, that generated significant discussion online. Rumors of cancer had circulated. No confirmed medical specification beyond the spinal fractures and the reference to privately managed health matters was ever issued by the network or the family. Joni Lamb, consistent with what multiple accounts across this entire story described as her fundamental disposition: the maintenance of a controlled public presentation even under extreme pressure, had chosen not to disclose the nature of what she was fighting. That choice, whatever we make of it personally, was one final expression of the same tension between privacy and transparency that had run through every chapter of the Daystar story. What is documented is this. In the days immediately preceding May 7, 2026, Joni Lamb's condition deteriorated rapidly. Those who surrounded her at the end knew she was dying. Jonathan Lamb and his wife Susie were, by Susie's own account shared publicly on social media, very close by, down the road from where Joni lay. They were not called. The decision not to summon them was consistent, according to what was communicated afterward, with Joni's own expressed wishes that her illness be kept private. The Roy's report confirmed that Jonathan learned of his mother's death only when Daystar attorney Tom Callender phoned him, not to ask him to come, but to tell him it was over. Jonathan reportedly asked how it was possible that he had not been called sooner. The answer communicated to him was that those had been Joni's wishes. Susie Lamb's words on X, "We were down the road, but weren't given a call to say goodbye. We forgive them," became among the most widely shared responses to Joni's death, carrying within them the full, compressed weight of 2 years of estrangement, the loss of a reconciliation that had never arrived, and a grace extended over a wound that had not been healed before time ran out. Jonathan had said publicly, the day before his mother died, that he would always love her, and that if anything ever went wrong, he would be there. His mother had reportedly told him she believed nothing would go wrong. He was not there when it did. He was not allowed to be. The reaction to Joni Lamb's death reflected the full complexity of what she had represented in life. Those who had known her for decades expressed sincere and genuine grief. Paula White Kane wrote on social media, "Today a general for the kingdom, a pioneer, a worldwide evangelist and my friend went to be with the Lord. With tears in my eyes, I will miss you." Pastor Travis Johnson of Pathway Church in Alabama wrote, "I'm heartbroken at the news of the passing of my friend Joni Lamb. Her life, love for Jesus, passion to share the gospel, and her friendship has meant so much to me and to people around the world." The Daystar board praised her in its official statement as someone whose love for the Lord and for the people the ministry serves had shaped the network from its foundation, and said the board grieved her loss and was grateful for the legacy of faith she had left behind. These are sincere words from people who genuinely knew and cared for her, and they deserve to be received as such. The public conversation in the hours following her passing could not, however, be entirely separated from the 2 years of documented events that preceded it. The departure of more than 30 major ministry partners, the regulatory history of Doug Weiss on record with the state of Colorado, the accounts from former counseling clients, the financial documentation raised by the Trinity Foundation, the imprecatory prayer borrowed from a businessman's financial context and broadcast to a global ministry audience, the granddaughter at the center of the most serious allegation in the entire story, an allegation the police closed without charges, but that Jonathan and Susie Lamb maintained, publicly and without retraction, as the defining moral wound of this episode. None of these things were resolved by Joni Lamb's death. The network still exists. It still broadcasts. The questions about its governance and stewardship remain open, and the people who raised those questions are still alive and still waiting for accountability. The Daystar board has stated that Joni had worked with leadership before her death to ensure an executive team was in place for an uninterrupted transition. The membership of that team was not identified in the network's public announcement. It is not publicly known who now holds operational authority over the network day to day. Joni's daughter, Rachel Lamb Brown, had taken on expanded hosting duties during her mother's absence, and the question of Doug Weiss's continued role at the network, a role that had been publicly and forcefully contested by departed broadcasting partners, by viewers, by the documented regulatory record in Colorado, and by the family conflict he entered and intensified, remains unresolved and deeply consequential for the network's future. Whether the Daystar board uses this moment of transition to genuinely address the institutional concerns raised over the preceding 2 years, or treats those concerns as closed simply because Joni is gone, will define what Daystar becomes from here. As the Roy's report has noted, because Daystar operates as part of the Word of God Fellowship Church, it is not required to file an IRS Form 990, maintaining a degree of financial opacity that few institutions of its scale operate behind. That opacity existed before Joni died. It does not automatically lift with her passing. What remains, after the biography and the building, after the grief and the scandal, after the private illness and the final silence between a mother and her son, is something that resists resolution into either eulogy or indictment. Joni Lamb was a 65-year-old woman who built something genuinely remarkable from the ground up, who started with a husband, a calling, and a vision, and produced a ministry reaching billions. She buried the man who had been her partner in that work for nearly 4 decades. She carried the full weight of a global institution through her public grief. She made choices in the aftermath of that grief that fractured her family and damaged her network's credibility simultaneously. She became ill and chose to face that illness without public disclosure. And she died, surrounded by some of her family, but not all of it. The son who had been her firstborn, who by multiple accounts had been beloved by Marcus as a man of integrity, who Marcus had blessed personally just months before his death, was down the road when his mother took her last breath. He was not called. Susie Lamb's 3 words, "We forgive them," do not erase the wound. They acknowledge it. And there is a profound and important difference between those 2 things. The Book of Psalms speaks honestly about lives lived before God that contain both genuine faith and genuine failure, both real devotion and real damage to the people around us. The 23rd Psalm doesn't describe a life without shadow. It describes a walk through the valley of the shadow of death, sustained not by the absence of darkness, but by the presence of a shepherd. Whatever one believes about what awaits beyond this life, and whatever one ultimately concludes about the choices Joni Lamb made in the years that preceded her death, the image that endures is this: a woman who reached billions with a message of hope, who loved God as she understood him, who kept her suffering private until there was no more time, and a son just down the road, who had said the day before that he would always love her, waiting for a call that never came while she was still alive. The Colleyville Police Department said they would reopen their investigation if Jonathan and Susie's daughter makes a formal disclosure. She is older now than she was when this began. Her story is not finished. Jonathan and Susie Lamb are still there. The network is still broadcasting. The questions still have answers owed to them. And for every person watching this who knows what it is to lose a parent with an unhealed wound still between you, without a final conversation, without the chance to say the things that needed to be said, the weight of what Jonathan and Susie are carrying today requires no explanation. Grief is hard enough when the relationship was whole. Grief with an open wound in it is something else entirely. Whether the people who now hold authority at Daystar rise to meet Susie's offered grace with real accountability, by honoring what Marcus built, by addressing what went wrong, by caring for the living as much as they mourn the dead, is the question that now belongs to the people still standing. God is watching, as many voices throughout this story have said. Whether those with the power to act believe it deeply enough to do something with that belief remains to be seen.